Welcome to BYJU'S, and we are back with another edition of review of international events all over the globe. And this week's review is really action-packed. We have been often talking to you about how small developments have a tendency to snowball and result in a crisis, and this is what exactly happened in the past week. There was a statement by the French President Macron after a school teacher had been very brutally beheaded by misguided jihadist youth who had been brainwashed by extremists. And Macron not only obviously understandably condemned this event, he said this was a challenge to the secularism of France, this was an attack on the Republic, and France would not buckle down under such terrorist pressures and attacks. But he made a few other remarks which became controversial. He said Islam is facing a crisis the world over, and these incidents are a result of that, and Islam has a need perhaps to reform itself. He also said that the French Republic recognizes the right of the freedom of expression, no holds barred. You could criticize anybody, you could even make a blasphemous statement, and there would be no going back on this. There was immediately a backlash. Of course, after this attack, the police got into action and the police wanted to investigate who all might have been involved in this crime, this heinous crime. The assailant was shot dead, but then there were records of his conversations, his communication to him, communication to other people on internet and social media about a lot of people who were objecting to the caricature, the cartoons drawn of the Holy Prophet, which had been shown in the class by this teacher, unfortunate teacher. This man had given students the warning that they should either leave the class or avoid looking at the cartoons which he was showing, and he was only making a point in a class, in a history class, in a social science class, but this was unacceptable to parents of some students who went active viral on social media and said this man should be sacked, this man should have been penalized, and this kind of a thing was intolerable for them. Now, unfortunately, sacking a school teacher for doing his duty, and in France the education is free, so he was doing a public duty paid for by the government of France, and then to sort of trespass on the basic values of a country where you live. You have a freedom of expression to criticize the president, to criticize the policies, but you possibly cannot accept that another country where you have come as an immigrant should accept to whatever hardcore doctrinaire opinions you have. Now, about France, there's an interesting thing. There are close to 5 million people who practice Islam who are French citizens, and they comprise almost 9% of the total population of France. Part of this goes back to the days when France had colonies in Africa, in Algeria, and where from these people, not only from Algeria, from other parts of Africa, they also ended up and made France their home. Since then, other people have come from Syria, Afghanistan, and they are these people. Now, many of them who comprise this 9% of the totality of the French population, the Muslim population, are born in France Muslims. Now, that doesn't make a difference because they may have been born in France, they may have grown up in France, they have imbibed the ethos of French Republic, but in the recent years there have been many cases where youngsters who have been born in England, in America, in Germany, in France and other European countries, Spain, have suddenly found a strange attraction towards the extreme form Islam practiced by the Islamic Caliphate and the IAS and the Sheikh, and they have been swinging towards from some kind of a ennui, some kind of an angst from the values in the societies where they have grown up. And the argument not to defend them has always been this, that this has little to do with religion, but these youngsters feel left out, victimized, ghettoized, because they are not treated as equal citizens by people who are whites, people who are Christians. So they don't say that they are being victimized only for religion, but they are being looked down on as second-class citizen for being poor, for having a different color of the skin, and also practicing a different religion. So they get profiled, they get targeted, and they of course live much less affluent lives than those who are whites and Christians and have lived in the cities. That's one part of the thing. Now, the moment Macron said something about Islam being in crisis, Islam should reform itself, France would not put up with this, there was a backlash, there was a pushback. Lots of countries outside, in Middle East mostly, but outside Middle East also, and Turkey particularly, criticized Macron in very harsh terms. The President Erdogan of Turkey was probably the most brutal, who said the French president needs mental treatment, he suffers from a mental sickness, and he shouldn't be making these irresponsible statements. Others said that he had lost his balance, he should make amends, he should apologize, which of course the French president was absolutely reluctant to do. Now there are wheels within wheels. It is, at one level you may say this is going to be a crisis between Christianity and Islam. Islam may be in crisis, but Christianity also has not been a religion absolutely without its problems. So whether it is evangelist Christian missionaries during the presidential campaign in America, whether it is the reluctance of the Roman Catholic Church to accept sexual abuses within the church or talk in terms of things which are taboo in Roman Catholic belief, abortion, same-sex marriages, divorce, stem cell research, and so on, euthanasia, medical termination of pregnancy. So it cannot be that there is only one religion in the world which is dogmatic, medieval, looking back to the past, and extremist. That's one part of the thing. But then it is not only a religious issue. The problem is that the President Macron identifies himself as a centrist politician in Europe. He is trying to fight off the challenge from extreme right, who wants to be extremely harsh on Islamic jihadists in France and Europe and elsewhere. So he has an election in less than 13-14 months. So he is trying to win over support from people who are on the far right, extreme right, and he of course he started off as a socialist, but he has distanced himself from the socialist organized trade unions and workers. So he has a pressure on him because of Brexit and because of the issues of fishery and other tariff barriers not having been sorted out. So some people argue that this is more to do with the French elections coming in next year and a quarter or a year and a half, which is making Macron make these extreme statements. But at the same time, let's be fair. When Turkey or Iran or Saudi Arabia or Emirates came out criticizing the French president, they also must realize that religions must coexist in today's 21st century world. No one religion can say that its extreme views or its dogmatic views or its orthodoxy should be subscribed by everybody else. Now the interesting part is this, there were protests against what the French president said in Pakistan. There were protests against what he said in Bangladesh. Now let's look at it this way. We have been talking about 9% of the Muslim population in France, and a little less than this, about 4 million people who profess Islamic faith stay in Germany. So France and Germany, both where there has been a backlash against Islamic fundamentalism, are the two large countries in Europe and natural leaders, founding fathers of the European Union. Now what is happening is that the youngster who perpetrated this crime in France was a person of Chechnyan origin, Russian speaking, whose parents had come as immigrant to France. So this was a problem which Russians are also facing in their southern soft belly, as they say sometimes, in Dagestan, in Chechnya, in southern Caucasus, and that is where also Turkey is active, in Armenia and Azerbaijan. Now that is a conflict which we have been discussing in past. It is an ongoing conflict which puts the whole question in a different perspective. Erdogan has identified himself as a protector of the Azerbaijanis, Azeris, and he says there are two countries but one nation, two states but one nation, and this is creating a problem because there has been an uneasy peace between Putin's Russia and Turkey, where they have been fighting in Syria against a common enemy like the IAS, but supporting different factions. The Russians support Assad there in Syria, and while Turkey is supporting those who oppose him. But there has been something very interesting. There has been a small kind of a truce in a region called Idlib, where these people, which is supposed to be the last bastion of the IAS Caliphate people. Now, recently, Russia launched an attack against the security forces who had been working, supported by Turkey, against Assad in this area, and this hit resulted in 35 people being killed, many more being injured, over 50 people being injured, and Turkey has issued a warning to Russia that this would not be taken as a friendly act. Obviously, there should be amends made for this. Now, this is interesting because Turkey is extending itself from Libya to Eastern Mediterranean to Southern Caucasus and projecting itself as a leader of the Muslim countries. So President Macron's statement gave it an opportunity to do this. So at the moment, apparently there is some kind of a unity in the diverse range of Africans, Arabs, and all the Muslims the world over. But interesting part is this: when all the Muslims unite and say, at least for the time being, that 1.9 billion Muslims cannot be taken lightly by Europe, by America or Russia or anybody else, they tend to forget that this 1.9 billion Muslims is not only in Arabia, Middle East, Southern Caucasus or in Africa. Majority of them stay in Indonesia, in Bangladesh, and India and Pakistan. Pakistan, there are a lot of compulsions of Imran Khan. We shall be talking about it at length elsewhere. He has to support this. But Bangladeshis have come out, of course, supporting that they would not tolerate the insult to a prophet because there is a prohibition about drawing an image of prophet, far less making a caricature or a cartoon of it. But this has extremely interesting implications. The other countries which have been with Turkey, like Malaysia, are so embroiled in their constitutional problems at the moment that they have not made any statements. Indonesians have stayed, who are the largest concentrations of Muslims on the planet, have kept quiet discreetly at the moment. But India has come out in support of saying that we stand by France, and there is a bit of a problem here because India has to live with a very large Muslim population, which is, after Bangladesh, next to Pakistan, the largest again, after Indonesia, the concentration of Muslims. So the Muslims in South Asia and Muslims in Southeast Asia far outweigh the Muslims in other parts of the world. So the 1.9 billion which is being branded against Europe, against Macron, has to be taken with a little pinch of salt. There also is the issue of how Russia would react to it. There is also an issue of how China will react to it, which has been having a problem with the Uyghur Muslims in the province of Xinjiang. Now, if you keep the big powers, the Russia, the America, and the China, they have, you can't call them, all of them, suffering from Islamophobia. They have had to cope with the issue of Islamic terror, as had India to do with this. The Indonesians have suffered because of this. And the Islam, which is far more tolerant, far more pacific, far more humane, is outside the hardcore Arab Salafi Islam, Wahhabi Islam, and this Jihadi Islam there. Now, if we keep all this in mind, we have to realize that this is not the last of what we have heard. This is likely to snowball, but at the same time, the Turkish president says we will boycott all French goods. If the Europeans support French, we will boycott their goods, maybe the next step. Italy was the closest trading partner of Turkey, and the Turkey has not so far issued any warnings to Italy, but Italy has also come out in support of the benefactors and senior partners in the European Union. So on one side, we see this a crisis for the European Union. On the other hand, it is a big powers probably ultimately seeing that supping with the devil, supping with Islam is not there. So the Muslim country is called Macron as worshipper of Satan and a devil. Macron demonizes the jihadist and the Islamic jihadist. So this is a crisis of Western style secularism, but there are shades and echoes of centuries old jihad in this. And as far as countries like India, like China is concerned, it also is a confrontation of the old colonial powers, whites and Christians, who want to impose their values and impose their international law, secularism, etc. on the rest of the world. So this is going to be a major issue in coming months. Another country which hit the headlines for all the wrong reasons was Nigeria last week. Now, Nigeria is a very interesting country. It is a populous country, it is a large country in geographical area, it is considered by some as the most important country on the African continent for a simple reason that earlier South Africa was supposed to be a rich, developed country, but South Africa has gone downhill very fast, and the only other country which seems to have a potential of certain stability and prosperity appeared to be Nigeria. On the west coast of the African continent, Nigeria is an oil-producing and an oil-exporting country, and India has an interesting partnership with Nigeria. We import a lot of our oil from Nigeria, and we have had a very friendly relationship with this country. Nigerian footballers have come here, Nigerian students have come here. There occasionally have been some irritants, but nothing very serious. Now, what happened last week in Nigeria was something very tragic. There were some Nigerians protesting peacefully in the capital and in Lagos, provincial capital, where they were singing the national anthem of Nigeria when the military, without any warning, opened fire on unarmed civilian protesters peacefully, singing the national anthem, waving the national flag, and it is estimated that over a dozen people died, lot more were wounded. And what were they protesting against? They were protesting against a long-standing demand to abolish SARS. Now, what is SARS? Is a special anti-robbery squad. This had been established close to 20-25 years ago to control armed bands of robbers and dacoits and blackmailers and ransom seekers from harassing the public. And these people had been given interesting powers, serious powers to seize and search and control this. But over a period of time, what happened is that this special anti-robbery squad became robbers themselves. They armed themselves. Earlier they were not armed. Nobody was checking their power. Nobody could supervise them. Nobody was regulating them. So they became criminals in uniform themselves, and they were violating with impunity the citizens' rights to move around freely, forget about expressing of opinion and so on, and they were being used as muscle by a dictatorial authoritarian government. Now, the misfortune of Nigeria has been that ever since Nigeria secured independence decades back from the colonial rule, it has faced with communal violence between Christians and the Muslims, between the regional conflicts of underdevelopment of North and South, the intra-tribal conflicts, and also the army playing a role, a partisan role in tribal conflicts, playing a partisan role in communal religious strife, and also becoming extremely corrupt as they became entrenched in power. And as of this moment, although Nigeria is potentially very rich, this is the country which also has the gravest disparity between the very, very rich people and very, very poor people. Inflation has run rampant, and the central government has almost abdicated its power to enforce its sovereignty and control. So wherever there are terrorists, either Islamic jihadists or renegade army soldiers or mutineers, they pick up arms, they loot arms, they go out and they control small areas. And when they are chased, first of all, nobody has the courage to chase them, and the morale of the army is very low. But when they are chased, they disappear into the jungle, they go to their sanctuaries, they go across the border to another country, and there has been this spreading proliferation of the different Islamic groups who take different names, but they keep challenging the authority of the central government. A few decades back, what had happened, the army rule was gotten rid of and elections took place. But the President Buhari, who's also been there for a long time in Nigeria, is now popular once, is no longer popular. People think that he is not supervising the army or the police effectively enough. He is not worrying about the economic inflation. He is not worrying about managing the coronavirus crisis. There is no infrastructural development. Of course, in cities, there is lavish construction, large-scale corruption, and disparities growing. So there has been this disparity, and with the new social media, the Nigerians at home also can rally around support with fellow Nigerians in diaspora. They see what is happening about democratic protests from Hong Kong to Belarus to Black Lives Matters, and they also get inspired. So when the government tries to suppress them, they can form informal networks and have almost a parallel resistance movement running on. There has been incidents of violence in past, but this time it was just too much. Now, what has happened is that the reaction of the government has been pretty disgusting. The president came out and said, I don't know who gave them the order. The governor of Lagos came, said he did not know that the army was there. But the worst was that the army blankly refused that they were there, or there had been any firing, or anybody had been killed. Unfortunately, in this day and age, it is impossible to do so. Anybody having a mobile phone, anybody having a smartphone can make a video, put it on the YouTube, and then it becomes viral. Now, the SARS, the Special Anti-Robberies Squad, was treating anybody with a phone, anybody with a laptop, anybody whom they thought was a youngster who could be in touch with net, they were prosecuting those people. Now, this kind of thing, gross violation of human rights and killing people, torturing people, has been a bane of Nigeria for quite some years. President Buhari is on a very slippery floor and a difficult wicket. He is back against the wall. Right now, there has been a lull, there is a wane in movements because the army has imposed a curfew. The government at the moment is precariously purged. Will the army take over again after a coup? Will there be a brutal repression as we have seen of democratic aspirations of the people and movements like in Hong Kong or Belarus temporarily? Or will the youngsters not give in, and also like the Black Lives movements, which doesn't seem to ebb at all even in America, as the presidential elections are nearing, Philadelphia is again out of control, black lives are being lost, policemen on mere suspicion are killing men of color, and this is going to have an impact anywhere else. We have talked in past about the outrage of the indigenous people from Latin America to Australia, from Canada to New Zealand, from Papua New Guinea. So all these seem to be merging, and what we are witnessing in Nigeria is an extremely sad spectacle, where in Africa Nigeria is not the only country which has had faced civil war which is running into decades. Congo is there, Democratic Republic of Congo is there, Angola and Mozambique are there. Nor is Nigeria the only country where army authoritarian rule has been there for long, or the same president has been re-elected in rigged elections or reinstalled after even a fair and free elections more than once. So we have this problem even in the neighboring Guinea, where the president has won the third time and he's also facing opposition. But what is the crisis in Nigeria assumes greater importance because of its oil riches, because of its oil export, and dependent on many countries in the world on its relationship with Nigeria for oil and energy. So this is going to be a difficult, delicate problem for the world to handle, to criticize. It is a sovereign country, it is an elected president, but the people seem to be restive, people seem to be losing patience, and the efforts to brutally suppress peaceful protests, it is happening in Thailand. But so far, nobody has been shot dead. But Prayut again in Thailand has repeatedly said he will not resign. So if you dig in your heels like Lukashenko in Belarus, Prayut in Thailand, Chinese in Hong Kong, then there is little time the world has to look at these aberrations, these distortions of so-called democratic regimes in Africa. They are rich, the ruling elite is corrupt, and there is a nexus between them and some vested interest in big powers in Europe. And any effort to do so might be misconstrued as neo-colonialistic intervention. As far as India is concerned, the most significant event last week was the 2+2 meeting of the foreign ministers and defense ministers of India and the United States of America. It is significant in the sense that the presidential election is hardly 10 days away, and the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense found it necessary to travel in person in this day and age when most things are discussed on virtual meetings and so on, to come to India to finalize the defense deal, as they say, not a deal of purchase of weaponry or of armament, but of forging an alliance, if not a military alliance, but a strategic alliance to cope with the challenge of China, both on the Himalayan border and in the South China Sea. Now, both these gentlemen came and had long discussions with the Indian Defense Minister Rajnath Singh and Dr. S. Jaishankar, and Pompeo and Esper spent considerable time naming China as a threat to stability and peace and the threat to India, and came out with open support. The Indian side avoided trying to maintain a delicate balance, naming China. They talked in general terms of the enemy, of expansion, of territorial integrity and security, but the end result was, when a statement was issued after the meeting, it was quite clear that India had signed an agreement on sharing intelligence, sharing geospatial information, which would be of great value in time of a conflict. It doesn't necessarily mean that when India is attacked, America would automatically rush to India's has defense like the Cold War military alliances of NATO, NATO, CENTO, etc. But that doesn't really matter, because if we see the other conflicts in Azerbaijan, Armenia has a deal with Russia, treaty, but Russia has not immediately come to the aid of Armenians after Azerbaijanis have been hammering them for almost a month, aided by Turkey. But that is not the point. The signaling to China is very clear. And definitely China is rattled. China says that America has no business to be in this region. America is playing a very dubious, devious game. It should not try to divide a wedge between Asian countries, between friendly nations. Now, this is rather odd and ironical, because China, after having attacked India in Galwan Valley, in which India lost 20 people and an officer, cannot say that we are friendly nations and America has no business to be here between two friendly nations. Indians for a long number of years have been saying that all disputes between neighbors should be settled amicably, bilaterally, peacefully. But this has failed with Pakistan, this has failed repeatedly with China, and India has been betrayed by China repeatedly. So one is curious that why the Indian Defense Minister, Indian Prime Minister, Indian Foreign Minister are so worried about the Chinese sensitivities, that at one hand they say boycott Chinese goods, we say that we are having a major threat on our borders, and we say we are prepared to defend our territory, not an inch will be yielded out. Our National Security Advisor says we'll carry the fight in our soil, will carry on the fighting in foreign soil, but then immediately a clarification is made the next day that he did not mean that the fight would be carried on, somebody else on his behalf issued a clarification on the Chinese soil. But what is Chinese soil? What is Indian soil? This is a disputed territory, not only in the Himalayan borderland, also in South China Sea. So the Chinese perception, the Chinese argument all the time has been that this is a bilateral perceptual problem. It is not a bilateral perceptual problem. It is not a semantic problem. There is a very real dispute about real estate, about territory, about ground, or about the bodies of water. Now the Americans have been steadfastly on India's side, and let us also not forget that India is not making a break from the past. If you see, the Indians started drawing close to Americans ever since the policy of liberalization was adopted. The strategic cooperation started much more when it was reinforced by the talks by Jaswant Singh, the then External Affairs Minister, and Strobe Talbot. It was done during Atal Bihari Vajpayee's Prime Ministership. And also, let us not forget, it is not only the BJP which has crossed the Rubicon on decided to go with the Americans. It is also the UPA government, when Dr. Manmohan Singh signed the 1, 2, 3 peaceful uses of nuclear energy agreement with that, and he was prepared to risk his government for that. There are some strategic analysts who argue that this kind of a defense agreement should have been signed with America long time back. So it would have been, but Manmohan Singh somehow or other turned chicken afterwards. He did not like the idea of confronting. He kept smiling when Bush was standing next to him, but he did not follow through the strategic relationship with America to the hilt. Now, and also let's not forget that India's trade with China increased manifold under the watch of Dr. Manmohan Singh, who is the one who made that infamous statement that the border dispute can be put on a back burner. Our trade with China had a scale which was much more important to us. It did not matter ultimately when China wanted to turn the heat on the border. So I think India had given them one more handle to twist our elbow with, which was the trade. And right now we realize that if we boycott China, whether it is in advanced medical intermediaries, or whether it is telecom equipment, whether it is other things which we import from China to export to other countries, things are going to be difficult for Indian economy. But Indian economy is far smaller in size than Chinese economy. So maybe we have a large market, but can we have a build-up? And the Chinese are claiming that theirs is the only economy which is growing in real terms 3.5%, where all other economies are contracting. So, but let's not get into that discussion. What is more important for us to understand is this, that the Americans, for their reason, it has also been argued that the Americans are only signaling through this visit to China that China should not underestimate them. So the American presidential election, where Donald Trump is trailing behind Biden in the polls, the argument would be that he is taking a tough stance against China. His Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense are helping out friends like India. So they have not minced word. They have called India a friend. They have said we'll support India. They have named China, and Indians have ultimately signed an agreement to share intelligence and geospatial information, which might make in a conflict situation, the actual conduct of war easier. Now, there are two other things about this visit which must be mentioned, that these two gentlemen are not confining their visit to India. They are also going to Sri Lanka, and they are going to try to persuade Sri Lanka, which has been under a great billion-dollar debt in Hambantota port and given out the port on 99-year lease to China, which is a very, very game-changing kind of a strategic development. So they would like to win over Sri Lankans and tell them that they probably have an interest to get out of the Chinese clutches, out of debt trap, but it is worth seeing, because it's the Western countries which have been criticizing Sri Lanka about human rights violations during their long-drawn civil war and the elimination of Leyte. And if the Sri Lankan government, the Rajapaksa government, has accepted billion-dollar assistance from China and given them a lease, it is very difficult to imagine that they can very easily wriggle out of that deal. But let's see what happens. The third country which the American trio is supposed to work in is Maldives. Now, Maldives is not important in itself, but it completes the circuit in the sense that they are trying to block the Chinese entry-exit from South China Sea to Indian Ocean through Straits of Malacca to this part of Andaman Sea and the Arabian Sea side. They also was a plan to visit Indonesia, but we haven't heard about that. Indonesians have kept quiet very tactfully, but the Americans know that they cannot take any ally for granted after President Duterte in Philippines swings the pendulum both ways. At times he talks about China, at times he talks about his commitment to stand by his neighbors in the neighborhood. It has a conflict with China, but it accepts that it can't face up to China. So the Americans are trying to convey a signal not only to India, but via India to everybody else in Southeast Asia and to China primarily, that we are there. So after this defense agreement, the Quad is on a firmer foundation. The exercises have been undertaken which involve thousands of soldiers and sailors between Australia, Japan, India, USA. So I think the Chinese are a bit rattled, but the Chinese also are facing problems. They may claim that their economy is growing, but they have made commitments on the One Belt, One Road, which is difficult to sustain. In this, it's not only a question of the Chinese economy. It is a question of the countries which they have projected to be partners in this, what is happening in their economy, what is happening in their politics. But this 2+2 meeting is interesting. The Indians are still trying to maintain a delicate balance between America, not China, but Russia, because Russia has been a major partner for us, and Russia has also made it very clear that it will not sign a military agreement with China. China might be important for their gas and oil purchases, but they are a bit reluctant to do a deal of arms with them or to give them a commitment, because in the final analysis, like America, Russia too would not like the primacy of China either in Asia or in globe, where Russia is a secondary subservient, if not subservient, subsidiary role to China in world politics. So the Chinese expansion, whether it can be sustained, whether the statistics coming out of the coronavirus being controlled or the market picking up in China can be taken seriously, or China would also face. China has one problem it doesn't face like many other countries in the world. It is a homogeneous population which has lived with adversity and authoritarian tyrannical rule for long. So China probably can keep things hidden from the rest of the world for quite some time. But whether it can actually project strength which it does not have, whether there is opposition to Xi in China. So all these American diplomatic maneuverings are towards that end. It is not kite flying, it is signaling to China that America is not going to withdraw from the region, and it is also probably signaling to opponents of China within China and others in Russia and other countries that Americans are still there, powerful enough. After the American presidential election, it might be even a sterner policy towards China. There were developments in Latin America which were interesting to say the least, most interesting to say the least. What happened was that there was a referendum in Chile, and almost 80%, 5% of the people voted in favor of discarding the existing constitution adopted during the tyrannical regime of the dictator Pinochet and having a new constitution. Now, Pinochet's rule is a period which is the darkest chapter in the history of modern Chile. He violated human rights in a brutal manner. People disappeared, people were tortured, people were killed, and he allowed army to ride roughshod on a democratic structure. People like Pablo Neruda had to go into exile and remain silent. The American multinational companies were rampant, and his policies were unabashedly capitalistic. Unfortunately, he did not pay a price for his crimes. He had the support of Americans. He was allowed to get out, and he died in his old age peacefully in his bed. And people have always been wanting for a closure, wanting for a reconciliation. And this has not happened so far. He had passed away from Chile's politics for quite some time, but the constitution, which favored capitalists, which favored foreign powers, which favored some kind, which discriminated against the poor, continued in Chile. So there have been protest movements against this, but this time expression of the popular will is so decisive that it is difficult to imagine that any government can go back. Now, the issues which remain to be answered are: what will happen? Will there be a new constituent assembly? Will people be elected, and the younger people would elect people who they think would be expressing their desires and aspirations, and an absolutely brand new constitution will be given to Chile. There are great hopes about this. Or there would be some kind of a partial reform. There would be a constituent assembly comprising of the senators and the congressmen, and they will come out, which will disappoint some people, but which might be not polarizing. But what is most interesting is that the issue is not only confined to Chile. Recently, the winds of change have been sweeping in all of Latin America except Bolsonaro's Brazil. There is resistance to Bolsonaro. It is difficult to imagine that Bolsonaro can ride roughshod over the popular aspirations all along. But then the point is, in Argentina, a leftist president has come to fore. In Mexico, a leftist president has remained in power for quite some time. Uneasy relationship with the United States of America, but because they share a border of Texas, the Americans have had to do a compromise with them. The wall which was talked about against Mexico, hasn't been built, partly due to corruption, partly due to American problems. They have had to release water to Mexico also. But that's another issue. But a little while ago, in Bolivia, when the elections took place, another person with the socialist inclinations won there. And let's not forget that Maduro in Venezuela has resisted all American pressures to oust him through coups and so on. And at the moment, it seems that the Latin American continent, where the flame of leftism, Marxism, socialism was extinguished, there are a few dying embers which have again caught fire, and we might see a change in a direction. But there is apprehension also that, like what happened in Cuba, Cuba slowly changes from a socialist, Castroist image to looking for a state capitalistic mode, maybe very different from the revolutionary Cuba. But then again, the interesting part is, at the moment, the Americans are busy with their presidential elections. Having decided their presidential elections, whoever is the successor of Trump or Trump is re-elected, then will they address the resurgence of leftism, Marxism, socialism in Latin America, which is a challenge to their Monroe Doctrine? Will they be in a position to make a difference? Is something which the world is watching very eagerly. In neighboring Pakistan, there have been some distressing developments from Prime Minister Imran Khan. Imran Khan is a charismatic personality. He is free from the taint of corruption. Some people have accused him of being a puppet of the Pakistani army, but then which Pakistani president or a prime minister has not been a puppet or a creature of army, from Bhutto, from the days of Field Marshal Ayub Khan to the present Prime Minister. So people keep talking in Pakistan of taking on the army, fighting the army, whether it's judiciary, whether it's an elected Prime Minister or a President, but the army ultimately prevails. That is the political culture of Pakistan. But what we judge a Pakistani leadership is how far is the leader, a civilian or an army leader, or one protected by the army, promoted by the army, is in a position to solve the problems of Pakistan, Pakistan's problems of economy, Pakistan's problems of social harmony, Pakistan's problem of coping with the terrorists it has nourished, it has fostered, and now they have turned back on Pakistan itself. So Pakistan is a bankrupt state. People are very fond of saying Pakistan is a failed state, Pakistan is a terrorist state, Pakistan is a rogue state, but we find the problems of Pakistan, they spill over to India. So we wish Pakistan well. We do not wish Pakistan should have instability. We do not wish that Pakistan should have economic problems and chaos, because if it happens, the anarchy will make it possible for army or any other leader to point fingers towards India and say that, look, India should first of all be coped with before we deal with any other problems. The problem with Imran Khan at the moment is he has in repeated interviews very candidly said the problem of which Pakistan has landed in my lap are of legacy of the past. You can't expect me to have a miracle magic wand and solve all the economic problems in 2 years' time, 2.5 years' time. You can't expect me to solve the problems of COVID when the global economy is suffering because of that. You can't expect me to have peace with India overnight and solve the Kashmir problem when Musharraf and Atal Bihari Vajpayee could not do it, when Mrs. Gandhi and Bhutto could not do it earlier, and so on. But this is not to be a defense lawyer for Imran Khan. The problem is that there are hundreds of thousands of people who came out in peaceful protests in Karachi. The Shias, they have a serious grievance against the Sunnis and the Punjabis vis-a-vis the Sindhis in Pakistan. The Balochis have a problem, and the Pakistan unfortunately is having to cope with the Frankenstein's monster it created in the Islamic jihadi terrorists. Now, how does Imran Khan cope with this challenge is his problem. How do Pakistanis support or oppose Imran Khan is their internal business. But where it makes a difference to India is that unfortunately in the recent past, Imran Khan, maybe under the army influence, maybe under his own compulsions, has drawn closer and closer to China, and the One Belt, One Road initiative, which leads to China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which cuts through Aksai Chin in Indian territory, illegally occupied with Pakistan, creates a problem where Pakistan-Chinese axis, which has continued for more than half a century, will continue to disturb India, and the Afghanistan problem and the Pakistan problem, the Americans might withdraw. The Taliban have not given up violence, and this is a place where India cannot say that we have no stakes at all. The stability of Pakistan, the prosperity of Pakistan is something which India has a stake in. So these developments in Pakistan are not very reassuring. This is all we have for you this week. We shall be sure to be back here with you next week with another edition of the weekly review of international events. We hope that you find it useful, and we hope you have found this one useful. These are events curated especially for you, for your preparation for competitive examinations. So till then, goodbye and thank you for watching.